Thank you for joining me. My name is Diana Rockwell of Rising to Excellence Admin Training. This video is designed with the administrative professional in mind and the unique job duties and tasks we are expected to do every day. With over 40 years of experience as a secretary, administrative assistant, and executive assistant, I hope my experiences and skill sets can help you excel in your chosen or fallen into profession. I appreciate your choosing to spend the next few minutes with me as we discuss best practices, file structure. Our agenda today is to discuss why we bother to file, what should you know about filing, the top 10 tips for a well-managed filing system, and to encourage you to use third-party tools. Do you hate to file? Me too. It's tedious and feels like wasted time. Whether you file hard copies or electronic documents, you need to keep the records for your business or home office. What's the best method? Should I index? What about email and scan files? Let's take a look at the various options available and see what suits your specific circumstances. Why bother to file? Make it easy for yourself. What are the reasons businesses file documents or electronic files? Filing is tedious and a lot of work, and it tears up my fingernails. Depending on your setup for paper files and your height, it can be challenging to file in high locations as much as low locations. Being 5'2" myself, it was uncomfortable for me to do the heavy filing in top drawers of a 4-drawer file cabinet. I also have a bad back, so bending over to file in the lowest cabinet was also problematic. Crouching down was difficult on my knees and difficult to keep my balance, and also tough to stand back up at my advanced age. In the legal industry, all documents, notes, invoices, etc. are kept in one file. So over time, it can become large and difficult to lift, pull, and refile. Same with medical files. So why have we done this to ourselves for decades? I'm so glad we are moving towards more electronic file storage and reducing our carbon footprint by not printing unless necessary. The pros: eliminate piles of paper or a root file directory full of documents. Easy retrieval when asked or needed. The cons are appearance of being unorganized, the inability to retrieve documents when bosses ask, and a failure to adhere to company policy for document retention. What should I know? The goal for maintaining a file system is to keep a historical record and ease of retrieval. While it sounds simple, it can quickly become a complex entity all its own. Every business wants organized files so documents can be easily retrieved when needed. They also need historical documents like contracts and photos, newsletters, payroll records, architectural drawings, etc. So they can be preserved in case of lawsuits or just historical nostalgia. We've all had to deal with someone filing a document under a name like Jones-Smith under either Jones or Smith. Time can be wasted in retrieval if you don't have a set of standard practices for each employee to follow. When you can't find a file because it's on the VP's desk while he's on vacation, Then everyone gets asked if they have the file, and again, time is wasted looking for it. Back in the 1990s, I worked for a financial advisor, and we had paper files organized by name. Each file contained all the accounts, so if someone had an investment account, an IRA, and a uniform gifts to minors account for their children, the copies of statements would all be in the same file. We used pressboard multi-tabs with 2 prongs, and each advisor would have several files on their desk, and sometimes they would stay there for weeks. We instituted an out file system with a placeholder in that file's place that was supposed to be filled out with the date pulled and the person who was using the file. That certainly helped stop the evening and weekend phone calls asking where a file was. And really, did I know who had it and what desk it was on? Usually not. Ten tips. Create a structure. Evaluate your current employer's business. Does it deal with clients like a CPA, lawyer, doctor, etc.? Or does it deal with projects like an architect, construction, software, etc.? There are many ways to file, and using one system rather than another may be the best for you. You may need to use several types, just in different places. You can use name files, whether you're setting up accounts receivable customer files or contracts. You can use category styles like departments or a main category of your work tasks like budget, invoices, quotes, training, facilities, marketing, etc. Date-based and indexing files are also other examples of widely used file types. Many corporations or larger institutions prescribe a file structure as mandatory so files can be shared across departments. Much of the time, a date-based or indexing-based system is used. I, for one, would be totally lost with a date-based filing system, and I'm grateful I've never had to use one. It's sort of like the Dewey Decimal System for documents rather than books. Indexing is typically used for archived scanned documents, and there is a method to their system and a cross-reference legend like on a map. Use a standard naming convention. You may want to decide whether you will use a standard for naming documents such as invoices. I deal with invoices on my current job, and I morphed into a standard after not being able to find certain files over time. First, remember to spell everything correctly. Then decide if you are abbreviating specific words such as months, names, using numbers for dates, etc. I currently use the company name spelled out because that's how I will search for it when I go to find it later. I include the invoice number because that's how the vendor will identify it. And then I add the month, abbreviated for space, and the full year. If your company has been around as long as mine, it's best to use the full year. Since we were established in 1890, using 00 for 2000 could mean 1900 as easily as 2000. You could easily use full numeric dates by using dashes or periods between the numbers. Currently, they don't allow you to use the slash. We want to consider how to deal with versions of documents as well. I often get blank contracts, need to complete them online, or by hand even, still. Then have them signed, scanned, and sent back to the vendor. I will save the blank and name it as such. Complete the form and name it as filled in. Print it out or have it electronically signed by something like DocuSign or Adobe Acrobat, and name that copy as signed. That version goes back to the vendor to be countersigned and executed. There are reasons why each version is saved. For example, if I incorrectly put my department director's name and contact information only to be told later that that should be the vice president because of the budget approval limits, I would need that version to be corrected. The signed copy is held close to the vest because the signature is legal and could possibly be lifted. So if anyone else in the company or outside needs to see the contract, I send the unsigned version, unless of course it's for a legal case, and then only the signed and dated version is appropriate. We use SharePoint for our document shared page that the business office, purchasing, the president, and all 5 vice presidents have access to. That way, if someone is looking for a contract or a quote to answer a question, it's readily available to them 24/7. And the admins do not need to be asked to find or send a copy at midnight on any given day. It also eliminates the need to have multiple copies of the same document on up to 10 computers, or someone has an older version. The business office is the keeper of original contracts in paper form, and they manage that system. This was one of my boss's better ideas and saved our purchasing office hours trying to hunt down the correct documents. Before deciding on a naming convention, think about how you tend to look for things. It will help you in the long run and make decisions easier. Excuse me. By spending just a few seconds longer, you can save yourself lots of time later while looking for something. File as you create. Rather than just name a file and leave it in your root directory or your download file, take the time while making the initial save command to put it in its proper place. If you receive an invoice by email for the internet bill for last month, for example, save it right away using your standard naming convention. You will still be using the hybrid method for processing invoices. When I receive the invoice, I print a hard copy. I save the files by name, invoice number, month, and year. I then enter the voucher, mark the hard copy with the date received and the voucher number, and put it in my orders folder, which is bright yellow and hard to lose. I wait for approval and then create an email to our purchasing department and attach the voucher and the invoice to it and send it out. I mark the invoice at the top, sent to purchasing, with the date and time. I keep a copy of the email in my inbox until it's acknowledged, and then move it to my invoices folder in Outlook. The hard copy is kept for a short time. Since I'm not the office of record, I can dispose of them quicker than the 3 years, especially since I have an electronic file. So as you see, I have used several different methods of filing just with that scenario, and combined hard copies and electronic files as well. And it's easy for me to backtrack when a vendor claims an invoice is past due. Don't store files on your desktop. Unless the file is accessed daily or several times a day even, try to avoid saving a shortcut to your desktop. We are mandated to close our screens when we leave our desks. You never know what malicious things can happen if you leave your computer on and are away from your desk. Anyone who sits down at an open computer will have the same permissions you do, and anything done improperly will be blamed on you. The only reason to leave the screen open is if your door to your office is locked. I worked with an IT guy who I found out later was dyslexic. He kept a copy of every program icon and every file he worked on saved on his desktop. It was so cluttered you couldn't see the pretty picture behind it, and it was a 24-inch monitor. It was his way to cope with the visual processing issue, and he didn't spend frustrating time trying to type things correctly to retrieve them easily. Back up your files. Your company may have a periodic backup done by IT. Often it's done daily, weekly, or monthly, depending on the size of your company, or all three, and have off-site storage. Now, most of that is going to the cloud as opposed to the physical disk I used to carry with me when I worked at the church. If there's a power outage or a hack into the system, you may lose files or have them held hostage for ransom. My institution does a daily, weekly, and monthly backup on separate systems, but only the shared drives. Anything saved to my internal hard drive is not backed up. I transfer my files once a month to a backup file on my department's shared drive just to be on the safe side. All my scanned items like invoices, signed contracts, and all of those types of documents are stored automatically on my hard drive. I started doing this during our first shutdown for the pandemic in March of 2020. We all thought we would be out for 2 or 3 weeks to clear up any lingering virus-infected people. It lasted through August. Then we had to lock down again in October when the lacrosse players hosted a COVID party and over 100 students were infected, and many more were quarantined because they were also either at the party or were roommates of people who were at the party. So I continued to keep all my files in one folder electronically. Working from home was a new experience for me, and although I did have a printer, and at first we shuffled papers back and forth, we stopped when it became so unmanageable and documents were being lost. People were confused whether to look in email or hard copy, and things were just messy. You may want to use a third-party tool like Dropbox or Google Drive, but we'll talk about that in the next segment. Skip your download folder. When you download a file, it is saved to the download folder on your computer's hard drive. I tend to just ignore that folder and rename the document I'm working on and save it under my standard naming convention in the appropriate folder. From what my research was telling me, it seems people work out of the download folder rather than move the file or resave it. It would be my recommendation to immediately save it to another file location. If for some reason you need to go back to the original, it's still in your download file, and most backups do not cover the download file. If it doesn't work, rethink it. You may decide on a naming convention and a file structure. You're happy with it until you no longer are. One day when you spend 20 minutes looking for a file you just saw the other day, but can't remember where, it may be time to revamp your system. It may need a major overhaul or just a small tweak. You may want to start cross-referencing certain files or sync your drive to a tablet or add more categories. Use several methods. As stated earlier in an example, I use several different methods of filing, and structures depending on the software program or purpose for the files. I have a standard system for my personally generated files, a different set of categories for stored files, and yet another system in my email. Somehow, it works for me, even though it may confuse others. Both Outlook and Gmail can use folders to organize your emails. I use a modified corporate structure in my email. So I have folders, for example, named Purchasing, Conference Services, Business Office, Facilities, Provost, Bursar, and then more granular like IT Invoices, Marketing Meetings, Division Newsletter. We also have a system to transcribe voice messages for our voicemail to email, so they are saved in a separate folder, so I always know where to find them. Turn on autosave. With the Windows 10 upgrade, Microsoft added an autosave function on their programs. It will turn itself on when a document is saved or printed. If you've ever lost a document you've spent half the day working on because the power went out or your system crashed, you know how valuable this feature can be. Conversely, if you are creating several files with much of the same content, don't make changes until you've saved that under the new name. Otherwise, you will write over your previous file. I recently made that mistake on certificates and had to go back and redo them because the program had saved under the previously used file. Have a retention or an archive plan. Many corporate entities have a standardized retention program that determines how long to keep certain types of documents. For example, where I currently work, handwritten notes are to be kept for 4 months. Typed meeting notes, invoices, and general correspondence are kept for 3 years. Contracts, even the expired ones, are kept for 20 years. The time limits are based on laws in your state and are tied to legal reasons if you are sued or audited by the IRS or the SEC. If your company does not have a plan, then do a little research and create one for yourself. Add it to your procedures manual so the person who follows you in the position can follow it as well. Consistency is key for retention and an archive plan because it may be 50 years plus that some documents are held. The college I work for has registration documents going back to the very first class admitted. We've discussed doing a scan archive project, but the price tag starts at $300,000 just to get it started right. The church where I used to work was formed in 1852, and there were baptismal and marriage certificates back to that time. We had a summer visitor in the area. We're on a resort area at the top of one of New York's Finger Lakes, and he was looking for a copy of his parents' marriage certificate that had been lost in a fire at their home. It was gratifying to see the look on his face when we found it and made a copy for him. Bonus tips. Food for thought. Create templates. Document your system. Stick with it. Review periodically. Keep growth in mind. Don't mix business and personal files. That mixing business and personal files is very important, especially if you're on the backup, because then your personal files will show up on the backup. Use third-party tools. Try several to see what works for you. There are copious amounts of apps and add-on programs that will help you manage and retrieve your files when you need them. According to Zapier.com, some of the most often used are Dropbox, which allows group functionality. Evernote has its own word processing and collaborative software. Google Drive, great for sharing and collaborative editing. Box, great for security for HIPAA or FINRA. OneDrive, also great for sharing and collaborating and editing. iCloud, used mostly for photos. Creative Cloud is an Adobe product. It's a little pricey. Sync, that's spelled SYNC, gives free access to zero-knowledge encryption. Zapier, ZAPIER, helps with repetitive processes. And pCloud for individuals that require security and enhanced privacy. We won't debate which one works best for you, since that would be a subjective decision based on personality, corporate policies, and IT policies, and the industry in which you work. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. This quote by Walt Disney has been very inspirational to me because I tend to ruminate ideas and think a little bit too long when I could have already had it implemented. The ability to quickly find the internet contract from 5 years ago will show your boss that you are organized and capable. Taking 3 hours to find it doesn't. To be at the top echelon of your profession means you know the details of your business, so your boss can focus on the bigger picture. So that does it for this topic. I appreciate your time watching and listening to Best Practices File Structure, presented by Rising to Excellence Admin Training. My contact information is provided on the last slide, and we hope you join us for another webinar soon. Bye for now.